Welcome back to our Bible study on the book of Ruth. This is the fifth instalment. I think there'll be just one more probably to sum things up and wrap things up and give some of my own opinion. But here we go on to the fifth instalment, which is chapter 4, which I will read as we go. No sooner had Boaz gone up to the gate and sat down there than the next of kin, of whom Boaz had spoken, came passing by. So Boaz said, "Come over, friend, sit down here." And he went over and sat down. Then Boaz took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. He then said to the next of kin, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our kinsman Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here, and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, but if you will not, tell me, so that I may know, for there is no one prior to you to redeem it, and I come after you." So he said, "I will redeem it." Then Boaz said, "The day you acquire the field from the hand of Naomi, you are also acquiring Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead man, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance." At this, the next of kin said, "I cannot redeem it for myself without damaging my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." I'm not going to go through the ancient laws that are being referred to here because they're all in the previous video, so do seek them out if you haven't already. But we are talking about the redemption as a law, being a kinsman redeemer, Goel, and we are also talking probably about levirate marriage as well. And it seems from this that Boaz is suggesting that they both have to take place. You can't sort of have one without the other. You either take the right of both, or you hand over the right of both. But either you are the next of kin and it is your right, your duty, I suppose is more probably the way, or you hand it over. So it's a wonderful chapter. Again, like the rest of Ruth, it gives us a real insight into ancient Israel, and in this particular section, into legal agreements and how they are made in ancient Israel. It's a really sort of important historical document as well as a theological one. Let's start off with the gate. We might sort of think these days more of sort of going up to the town hall or something like that, or the law court. For, of course, the Romans, there would have been a forum or something like that. Some kind of large square, perhaps, in the middle of the town or city. But that wasn't the case for these Israelite towns and cities. They didn't have central spaces. So the place you went for sort of public business was the gate. And at the gate, you would need to gather some of the elders to create essentially a makeshift court. And the number 10 is significant. The number 10, in biblical terms, is to do with God's law, the 10 Commandments, and God's authority on earth, and therefore connected with legal matters and sort of being core. So even to this day, you need 10 men to make worship at a synagogue count, as it were. So you get your 10 men at the gate, and then you go through the legal wranglings that need to go through, and the elders will oversee it and ensure that justice is served and the law is followed through. Of course, things happening at the gate will be familiar to churchgoers. For centuries, churches have conducted business at the gate. Part of the reason you have a sort of a lich gate and things like that, but also, I forget the name of it, but the rooms above porches in the church where you would conduct all your legal business before you went in to be married or any other sort of public ceremony. So the gate is really, really significant. We hear that this other kinsman, the one who is a closer relation, whose duty and right it is to take on these responsibilities, he happens to be passing by, which I think you could say, well, it's a small town, but it's fairly remarkable that it's exactly that time of day. I think this is pointing us towards God's hand in this. Providence is going on all the time, so gently behind the scenes. Okay. So we hear that the land is Elimelech's, that he has a portion of the common field. That's the most likely thing. Rather than him having his own field, it was probably a share of a common field. And there's been no mention of this land up until now, which could point to lots of things. It may be that Naomi may have had the land, but essentially couldn't sort of access the land because she was not connected with a male member of the family at the time, or would have no one to work the land, or the land was essentially sort of mortgaged in a way until it could be redeemed. Any of those sort of things. But we might also suspect again that Naomi and Boaz have had some kind of communication, or they know each other better than we've been led to believe, because Boaz is he's familiar with this fact. Or it might also be just possible that you couldn't resolve ownership issues of land until after the harvest. Of course, I suppose it wouldn't be very good if they were being resolved in the middle of the harvest when you've sown the crop and then find that they belong to someone else. So Boaz telling this other kinsman that if he wants the field, he would have to marry Ruth. It's a surprise to us, and it's a surprise to the kinsman. So are we being told that the land must come with the person, that they are all one inheritance? People and land go together. Is this a theological point? These are, of course, the two major promises of the covenant with God, that the people will multiply and they will be given a land of their own. So maybe it is pointing towards that truth. And why it's not worth this kinsman taking on Ruth as well, we're not entirely sure. Is it most likely because he won't? The land will pass to Ruth's children, and so he won't be able to access that. Essentially, he'll take Ruth as his wife. They'll have a child, but that child will then inherit the land, and so there's nothing in it for him. That is quite possible. It could be that there's just legal complications. Maybe he's put off by the fact that she is a Moabitess, although he doesn't say that. Whatever the case, his refusal puts Boaz's acceptance in a really good light, because it is obviously some cost involved in accepting the duty of Redeemer in this case, and yet Boaz is more than prepared to take that on. Let's move on to the next bit. That's verse 7. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, one party took off a sandal and gave it to the other. This was the manner of attesting in Israel. So when the next of kin said to Boaz, "Acquire it for yourself," he took off his sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have acquired from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, the wife of Mahlon, to be my wife, to maintain the dead man's name on his inheritance, in order that the name of the dead may not be cut off from his kindred, and from the gate of his native place. Today you are witnesses." Then all the people who were at the gate, along with the elders, said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you produce children in Ephrathah and bestow a name in Bethlehem. And through the children that the Lord will give you by this young woman, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." Now, this whole thing about sandals is quite peculiar to us, although we may well be familiar with things in the news where people take off sandals in the Middle East, and they use sandals in ways very often to sort of show shame, perhaps, on someone. And that certainly links us to another passage I'm about to read you, Deuteronomy 25, verses 7 to 10. Let me just read that. "But if the man has no desire to marry his brother's widow, then his brother's widow shall go up to the elders at the gate and say, 'My husband's brother refuses to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of a husband's brother to me.' Then the elders of his town shall summon him and speak to him. If he persists, saying, 'I have no desire to marry her,' then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, pull his sandal off his foot, spit in his face, and declare, 'This is what is done to the man who does not build up his brother's house.' Throughout Israel his family shall be known as the house of him whose sandal was pulled off." So there, a similar sort of a sandal ceremony is being used to shame someone for not taking up this responsibility. So in both cases, what is being kind of agreed to or not agreed to is not a handing over of land or a handing over of a person, a woman. It is the handing over of a responsibility, of a duty. So we can sort of see the sandal as the symbol of that duty and responsibility. So if you're not willing to take it up, you kind of get it thrown in your face, as it were. But if you can't, for some reason, you want to hand it over, then you pass over the sandal, that duty and responsibility. And that's really important, because we're not talking about sort of something that is profitable here necessarily at all. We're talking about a law that is in place to protect the weaker in the community. So it's a duty and responsibility. The fact that, of course, the custom is having to be explained in the text to the people reading at the time, right at the beginning there, verse 7. "Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging." That fact must mean that the author is writing sometime after the time of the judges, maybe considerably after. Probably, that gives credibility to the arguments that it's post-exilic or at least during the exile, that sort of thing. The council, they don't just carry out their legal duty. In this case, they pronounce a blessing on the couple, a wonderful blessing, may she be like Rachel and Leah. I mean, you couldn't get more illustrious names of women to the people of Israel. The two wives of Jacob. And this is she's not only a great honour bestowed on Ruth, particularly that she, given that she's from Moab, but also this is a prayer of fruitfulness, because like them, she's going to be the mother of nations, as it were. And the fact that the people join in, it is the whole prayer, it becomes the whole prayer of the people at the gate, signifies her acceptance by the whole community. And then, of course, this mention of Tamar, another Levirate marriage, and the ancestress of the tribe of Judah. So like her, like Tamar, Ruth is being grafted on to the family here. And her offspring will be like the house of Perez, born out of that Levirate marriage, grafted on, if you like. Verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When they came together, the Lord made her conceive, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life, and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her bosom, and became his nurse. The women of the neighbourhood gave him a name, saying, A son has been born to Naomi. They named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the descendants of Perez. Perez became the father of Hezron, Hezron of Ram, Ram of Amminadab, Amminadab of Nahshon, Nahshon of Salmon, Salmon of Boaz, Boaz of Obed, Obed of Jesse, and Jesse of David. There we are. We have reached the end of the text of this book of the Bible, and the last line, the greatest surprise and perhaps shock of all, that all of this is going to culminate in the birth of David, who will become the greatest king of Israel. It's a little bit like a fairy tale. You could imagine it as sort of a pantomime or a play on the stage. The last scene, it all goes glitzy. The story ends with the joyful marriage of Ruth and Boaz. And that sort of, it beautifully, neatly rounds off, completing Naomi's homecoming in Israel. We go right back round to Naomi again, who left empty and returned full, although she felt she left full and returned empty, so to speak. The words of the women of Bethlehem at the birth of Ruth's son are the final answer to Naomi's complaint in chapter 1. That she's not she's not Mara, she's not bitter anymore. That God has not forsaken her. In fact, the Lord is very, very much with her. Indeed, this is the first time we really hear that it was definitely God this time. When they came together, the Lord made her conceive, and she bore a son. And may his name be renowned in Israel. May the child be famous. This is God's gift. God is all and over all. And then this lovely bit about for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons. This is, of course, particularly interesting in a society that prized having sons over daughters. And in fact, even this last paragraph does that. That the Lord made her conceive and she bore a son, which is, of course, so important. But no, we are told that Ruth is more valuable even than 7 sons. And there may be a very, very subtle reference there to David, who will also turn out to be better than the other 7 sons of Jesse. So we have this great reminder at the end that that Ruth is a real heroine, that she is a faithful daughter-in-law, and it is that faithfulness, her hesed, that has really brought them to this point and has reflected the Hesed of God. She went beyond what was asked of her. And, I think I said right at the beginning that it's a real sort of women's book, where women take the centre stage, and it's quite unusual in biblical terms. And again, women sort of surround this story. At the end, we're told it's the whole community of women gather round and they pray and they name the child jointly. Of course, they name the child as Naomi's son. So Ruth is sort of like a sort of surrogate, really, in this ancient Israel way of thinking. Because it is Elimelech, really, who is the one being redeemed, who is being allowed to continue his line and his family continue to prosper, having essentially gone astray at the very beginning of the story by leaving for Moab, and now has been forgiven and has been restored, redeemed. Obed means servant. I think make of that as you will, really. But I suppose quite fitting for the child of Ruth, who has been such an incredible servant to her mother-in-law. And are we also to read into this story that in some way Lot has also been restored in the same way that Elimelech was? Elimelech went off in the wrong direction, but his family and his line have been fully returned. Even Ruth, it is said, returns with Naomi back to the bosom of Israel. And Lot, in a similar way, went off in his own direction, and things went awry, and Moab was born, but now Moab is essentially sort of being reintegrated into Israel. It's a bit sort of prodigal son, isn't it, I suppose, and perhaps it's sort of the voice of the proverbial other brother who sort of reminds us that Moab must not enter the assembly of Israel, which is kind of where we started the story, that it shouldn't be permissible, and yet God is hugely gracious and gathers everyone up under his cloak. And that sort of goodwill between Israel and Moab, it doesn't entirely end with this story. There is a sort of, we can see a DNA of it so running through later on when King David, when David himself continues to, he has a link with Moab. He entrusts his parents to the kings of Moab in a time of danger. So that's the end of this session. It's a shorter one on this occasion, but there will be one other when I'm going to give some of my own thoughts and opinions about the theology and the meaning of the book of Ruth. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for joining us.